The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled over the last rise before the river. Frozen grass crunched under the horses' hooves, and the wind, sharp as a blade, carried dust across the wide, open plain. Lily pulled her girls closer beneath the quilt, her breath forming small clouds in the winter air. Sam walked beside the wagon, coat collar turned up, hat pulled low. He raised one hand, shading his eyes as he scanned the land ahead. "Should be just over this ridge," he called out, trying to sound certain. He had clung to that certainty since the day the letter arrived, promising land, a cabin, a barn, and a place where a man could build his life from honest work and determination. Lily had believed in him. She must believe him now. The girls, Ella and Carrie, peeked out from the quilt, noses red from the cold. "Mama, how much farther?" Ella whispered. "Just a little, sweetheart," Lily said, smoothing her daughter's hair. But when the wagon crested the hill, Lily's heart dropped. There was no cabin, no smoke, no chimney, no fence line, no cleared field. Only the skeleton of a barn, its beams twisted, roof blown off from a windstorm, and the stark, open prairie stretching in all directions. Sam slowed to a stop. His shoulders sagged. This is supposed to be it," he said quietly. The girls pressed against Lily. She held them tight, fighting tears. The barn had collapsed long ago. Boards lay scattered like bones. Near the riverbank stood a single crooked stake with a scrap of cloth tied to it. Nothing more. Sam swallowed hard. "We'll make do," he murmured. "We'll get a shelter up before nightfall." He didn't look at Lily when he said it. He didn't have to. Lily climbed down and stepped onto the cold ground. She took Sam's hand. "We're here now," she said softly. "We'll face it together." Sam nodded, but the weight on his mind stayed. They worked until dusk, gathering what barn wood hadn't rotted through. Sam hammered while Lily steadied the boards with bare, cold hands. The girls collected fallen branches and carried them proudly, wanting to help. By sundown, the sky deepened into a bruised violet, and the wind came thin and sharp across the prairie. Together they raised a slanted lean-to against the strongest remaining post of the fallen barn. It wasn't straight, it wasn't warm, but it stood. Inside, Lily hung their quilt to block the worst of the drafts. She laid a pallet of dry grass, tucking the girls beneath the quilt's edge, with her skirts spread over their legs for extra warmth. Sam crouched outside over a small fire, feeding it bits of dried grass and splintered wood until he coaxed a steady flame. They ate a thin stew from a tin cup, passing it between them. The girls remained under their covers for warmth. The emptiness around them was enormous, prairie stretching endless and cold, the silence pressing in as if testing their resolve. Sam stared into the fire, jaw tight. "I'll ride out in the morning," he said. "There has to be a ranch nearby. We'll find help." Lily didn't challenge the uncertainty in his tone. She simply nodded and placed her hand over his. Inside the lean-to, the wind rattled the boards, breaking the silence. The girls trembled and ran to Lily. "Mama, are we going to live here?" Ella whispered. Lily looked at the broken barn, the wide prairie, the little pile of belongings they'd carried across states, and Sam's worn face in the firelight. She kissed Ella's temple. "For now, sweetheart, we're staying right here." Later, when the girls slept, Lily whispered to Sam, "We'll make it, as long as we're together." He squeezed her hand once, grateful for her strength. The wind howled. The night settled heavy over the plains. Sam rode out before dawn. The sky was still purple, the air sharp and cold. He kissed Lily softly, hugged the girls, and promised he'd be back before dark. The wind was calm when he left. By noon, it turned. A dust storm rolled across the prairie with startling speed. The air turned brown and thick. Lily hurried the girls into the lean-to, her heart hammering, and pressed them against her as the storm roared, shaking the boards, filling the air with a low, grinding howl. They waited in darkness, eyes burning, mouths dry. When the storm finally passed and the air cleared to a dull gray, Lily stepped outside, shielding her eyes. The horse had returned, alone. Its bridle hung torn, and its flanks trembled from exhaustion. Lily felt the world tilt beneath her. Hours later, 3 men from a nearby ranch appeared with grim faces. They had found Sam in a dry creek bed, where they suspected the wind had spooked the horse. The fall had been quick. Merciful, they said. They had brought him home. Lily did not weep loudly. She wept into her hands, knees on cold earth, the girls clinging to her sleeves. The ranchmen dug the grave on a rise above the river, while Lily read from Sam's Bible, her voice trembling. "The Lord is my shepherd." The girls cried against her skirt. Ella's sobs came in hiccups. Carrie simply buried her face and shook. Unseen on a distant ridge, 2 native men sat on their horses and watched the small gathering. They could not hear the words. They did not know the book. But they recognized the bowed heads, the shaking shoulders, the sound of grief. The prairie swallowed the last echo of Lily's reading as Sam's body was laid into the earth. 2 mornings after the burial, Lily woke early to fetch water. The sky was pale and thin, edged with frost. Her breath puffed in front of her as she stepped from the lean-to. She froze. A fresh doe lay on the grass, not 20 steps from the door. It was cleanly killed, placed carefully, not torn or left like a hunter's cast-off. Its legs folded neatly, as though someone had set it down with intention. Lily looked around. No boot tracks, no wagon ruts, just faint impressions where soft moccasins had pressed the ground. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Her eyes blurred. Whoever had left the doe had done so silently, without credit, without claim. Inside, she opened the trunk at the foot of the pallet and lifted Sam's shirt, the one she'd kept unwashed, folded at the top. Her fingers trembled as she laid it out. She cut a stack of small squares from the fabric, just enough to give, enough to honor the gift, without losing the whole shirt. Then Lily carried the stack outside and laid the cloth squares in the place where the doe had rested. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air, "whoever you are." The next morning, the cloth was gone. Days passed. The wind remained cruel, but something in the air changed. Travelers occasionally appeared along the river, a wagon missing a wheel, a couple with everything they owned in 2 sacks, a widow with 2 boys and a horse too tired to stand much longer. They came hungry, tired, wary. Lily fed some from her stew pot, even when it meant her own bowl was thin. She showed others where she'd stacked extra wood. She helped patch wagons, shared what she knew of the river's moods, and pointed to the flat stretch of ground near the barn remains when people asked where they might make camp. A small settlement began to form without anyone naming it. A crooked plank shelter near the leaned barn wall, a canvas tent reinforced with bundled grass, a makeshift smokehouse built from fallen boards, fire rings circled with smooth river stones. One evening, after helping an older couple settle into a tiny lean-to of their own, Lily stepped outside and looked over the fires flickering along the riverbank. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The wind bit at her cheeks, but she stood a little taller. This wasn't the home she had been promised, but it was becoming a home to those in need. "We stay," she whispered to the darkening sky. and we help whoever comes." No one heard the words but the wind. Still, she felt the land listening. It was late morning when Lily first saw the riders. 3 silhouettes approached from the east, moving steadily along the rise above the river. The chatter at the nearest cook fire quieted as people turned to watch. The lead rider was a woman. She sat tall and balanced on her horse, wrapped in a beautifully crafted doe-skin dress that reached her boots, the soft hide moving gracefully with each step of the animal. Around her wrists glimmered delicate bracelets, silver and turquoise that caught the winter light in brief sparks. Her posture was regal, steady, yet her face, as she drew closer, was kind. 2 long blonde braids framed the woman's shoulders, pale strands gleaming against the tan of the doe skin. Her hair looked like it belonged to some far northern country, yet here she rode in native dress, bracelets chiming softly. Behind her, 2 native men rode with quiet authority, watchful, not hostile. The woman brought her horse to a gentle halt at a respectful distance from the nearest fire. "Good morning," she called, her voice smooth and clear. "My name is Raven." Lily stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron, feeling Ella and Carrie press against her sides. "I'm Lily," she answered. "These are my daughters." Raven inclined her head in polite greeting. "We winter a few miles east of here," Raven said. "We have watched your settlement take root by the river. We thought it right to meet you, not as strangers." Her gaze flicked over the small gathering, fire pits, patched shelters, children clinging to their mothers' skirts, and Lily saw no judgment there, only assessment, and something like respect. "If you're willing," Raven continued, "our camp would welcome you for a visit, to understand one another, to speak of small, simple traits." Lily glanced around at the fragile homes, the people who had quietly begun to rely on her. Then she nodded. "We would be honored to visit." Raven's smile softened. "We'll return in the morning to guide you." She turned her horse with easy grace. Her bracelets chimed once more as the 3 riders moved back toward the horizon, leaving a hush of wind and hoofprints behind. Lily watched until they disappeared. Something had shifted again. Not like the storm that took Sam. Something good. The morning Raven promised arrived with a pale gold sunrise stretching across the prairie. Frost clung to the grass, crunching softly beneath Lily's boots as she stepped outside. Ella and Carrie bundled themselves in shawls, breath puffing in small white clouds. The girls bounced with nervous excitement when they saw the 3 riders approach. Raven led them again, doe-skin dress swaying, bracelets singing faintly, blonde braids glimmering in the early light. The 2 native men rode behind, calm and watchful. "Are you ready?" Raven asked. Lily nodded. "We'll walk." Raven inclined her head in approval. "Then we will ride slowly." They followed the river upstream, weaving through dried willow and stands of bare cottonwoods. The men rode behind, giving space but always watching the horizon with practiced eyes. Now and then, Raven slowed her horse to fall alongside Lily. "You've welcomed many to your fire," Raven said. "It takes courage to open your shelter to strangers." Lily brushed a loose strand of hair from Ella's face. "People came needing something," she said. "I know how that feels. Helping them helps me too." Raven nodded, as though she understood this more deeply than she could say. The trail dipped into a sheltered hollow. Smoke rose from small fires in thin, steady streams. As they drew near, Lily saw the camp, orderly, quiet, purposeful. 5 hide tents formed a loose semicircle. A frame of willow branches covered in hides made another shelter. Racks held drying meat and furs. Bundles of tools were stacked neatly beneath an overhanging branch. Children played with woven toys near one of the fires. The camp paused as they entered, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement. Raven dismounted and handed her reins to one of the children. She motioned Lily and the girls closer. "Welcome," she said simply. A group of women approached, their faces calm and curious. Raven introduced Lily and the girls in soft words, and the women nodded in greeting. One knelt to show Carrie a small doll made of braided grass and bits of hide. Carrie smiled shyly and accepted it. Raven led Lily to a fire ringed with smooth stones. They sat on folded hides opposite one another. Ella and Carrie settled nearby, hands extended toward the flames. A woman brought a small pot of warm broth and set it between them. Lily accepted it with both hands, understanding that this was generosity, not luxury. Raven studied Lily's face quietly for a moment. "Your home is small," Raven said, "but it already shelters many hearts." Lily stared into the fire. "I didn't plan it. People just came." "Sometimes the land calls people together," Raven replied. "Sometimes grief does." Lily's fingers tightened around the cup. "We lost my husband not long ago," she said, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. Raven's eyes softened. "We saw your mourning from a distance," she said. "Not the words, but the sorrow and the strength." Lily blinked hard. "It's been hard. I wasn't sure we could stay." "You're already staying," Raven said gently. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They spoke then of smaller things, the river's gifts, the seasons, the best places to cut willow branches. When Lily rose to leave and take her girls home, Raven said, "You are welcome at our fire, Lily. Any time." And Lily believed her. The days after the visit to the Cottonwood camp passed quietly, but something in Lily had changed. Before, every dawn had started with a question. Should we stay? Now, she woke wondering, how do we make this work? More travelers found their way to the river, a wrinkled couple from Kansas with nothing but a kettle and a broken cart, a young widow and her 2 boys, thin as broomsticks, leading a weary horse. 2 brothers turned out from a ranch after a bad winter. Lily welcomed them all as best she could. She showed the Kansas couple how to stack grass between the gaps in the shelter walls. She gave the widow the driest patch of ground she could find for her boys. She told the brothers, "If you're willing to work, there's space along the river." The shanty village grew. A crooked shed, a tiny smokehouse, a patched canvas tent. More fires, more voices. One evening, after settling the widow's boys in with extra blankets, Lily stepped outside. The sky was a dark bowl, sprinkled with stars. Along the river, little fires flickered, each one a sign that someone else had decided not to give up. She wrapped her shawl tighter, but her back was straighter than it had been the week before. "We stay," she whispered again, "and we help whoever comes." Winter deepened. Frost lingered longer each morning. The wind reached through clothing and bit at skin. Clothing was the settlement's greatest need. Boots, coats, and wool were scarce. Ella's shoes were worn thin at the soles. Carrie's had small cracks along the sides where cold air slipped in. Lily watched them press their feet closer to the fire every evening, rubbing their toes through worn stockings. Each night she patched and repatched the wool until the fabric was more mending than original. She kept her worry to herself. 3 days after the visit to the Cottonwoods, Lily woke with the weight of a decision in her chest. As the girls played near the river, she knelt by her trunk and gathered what she had of value: a spool of sturdy thread, 2 sewing needles, a stack of clean cloth squares cut from her best bit of cotton, a length of ribbon saved from Tennessee, a small tin of rendered fat left from the gifted dough, 2 smooth river stones Ella and Carrie had polished and called lucky. She wrapped everything in a square of muslin and knotted it tight. When the girls returned, cheeks pink, she spoke lightly. "How would you like to visit Raven again? She invited us. It's a fine day for walking." They clapped and chattered all through breakfast, imagining what toys they might see in the camp this time. They did not see the small bundle Lily tucked in the pocket of her apron. The walk to the cottonwoods was long, but not harsh that day. The air was cold but still. Ravens called from distant trees as the camp came into view, smoke rising in thin gray threads. Raven spotted them and rose, smiling. "Lily," she said, "I hoped you might come again." Ella and Carrie ran to the children, leaving Lily and Raven to sit by the fire. Raven's eyes searched Lily's face. "You carry something in your thoughts," she observed. Lily nodded. She drew the muslin bundle from beneath her apron and placed it quietly in Raven's hands. "I came to ask for a trade," Lily said, her voice low. "If you're willing." Raven did not open the bundle yet. "Tell me what you need." Lily glanced toward her daughters. Ella was trying to braid grass with another girl. Carrie was giggling over a small doll. Only when she was sure they were out of earshot did Lily speak again. "Christmas is coming," she said softly. "At the exchange, I want the girls to have something special." Her throat tightened, but she kept going. "I'd like to trade for 2 pairs of moccasins. Not just for the winter, but as their Christmas gifts." Raven's eyes warmed with understanding. She slowly unfolded the muslin and examined the contents with care. Thread, needles, cloth squares, ribbon, rendered fat, the polished stones. Her fingers lingered on the stones. "Your daughters chose these," she said. Lily nodded. "They like to find pretty things by the river." Raven smiled, then refolded the cloth around the bundle and held it in her lap. "We will make the moccasins," she said. 2 pairs. Strong, warm, sized for their feet alone. Lily exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you. They've lost so much this year. I want them to have something made with care." Raven reached across the fire and laid her hand over Lily's. "They will," she said gently. Lily swallowed back tears. "There's something else," she added quietly. "We're planning a small Christmas gathering in the settlement. Just handmade gifts and what food we can spare. It would mean a great deal if you and your people would join us." Raven's expression lit from within. "We will come," she said, "with glad hearts." That night, Lily told the others that guests were coming for Christmas. Not just guests, neighbors. They began to plan as best they could. The idea of a Christmas exchange passed from fire to fire. No one had money, but everyone had heart. The Kansas couple unraveled a worn wool shawl, smoothing the yarn and knitting it into small hand warmers for the children. The husband carved a simple wooden cross from a scrap of good lumber. The widow's eldest boy carved tiny horses and cows from barnwood, sanding each piece until it gleamed. His younger brother painted smooth river stones with berry dye, the colors patchy but earnest. The Ranch brothers fashioned small wind chimes from tin scraps, punching holes and shaping metal until they jingled softly in the wind. The older couple wove 2 grass mats with patterns surprisingly intricate, turning dried blades into something beautiful. Lily worked at night by lamplight while the girls slept. She stitched a patchwork table square made partly from Sam's old shirt, a cloth pouch with tiny petals stitched into one corner, a freshly mended shirt for the older man with a cough, 2 small dolls with yarn hair for the widow's boys. And in the very bottom of her trunk, she hid a single, carefully folded handkerchief, white, with a blue J stitched in the corner, for Jacob, who had chopped wood, fixed latches, and said little, but always seemed to be there when someone needed steady hands. At the Cottonwood camp, Raven entrusted the moccasin making to 2 skilled women. They worked by a low fire, hands moving surely, cutting the softest pieces of deer hide, lining the shoes with warm rabbit fur, measuring for small, growing feet, stitching tight seams with fine sinew, adding beads in soft winter colors, pearl, sky blue, muted amber. "These are for children," one woman murmured. "For children who will run far," another answered. When they were finished, the moccasins were placed in a deer hide-wrapped basket and set aside in a safe, hidden corner of the tent. Back in the settlement, the villagers chose a clearing near Lily's lean-to for the celebration. They scrubbed a table built of uneven planks and set up tumbleweed trees, tying them with scraps of ribbon and berry-stained cloth. Tin cans punched with star-shaped holes became lanterns, each one ready for a candle. At dusk, when the lanterns were lit, stars danced across the snow. The night before Christmas, Lily checked the moccasins once more where she'd hidden them beneath her pallet, fingers tracing the lines of the beadwork in the dark. She thought of Sam, of the grave on the hill, of the doe on the grass, of Raven's quiet strength. "This is for them," she whispered, "and for whatever comes next." Christmas morning dawned bitter and bright across the prairie. The cold was raw and biting, sharp enough to steal a person's breath and stiffen their fingers before they had time to blink. Lily woke before her daughters, shivering beneath the thin quilt. Their breath rose in pale clouds above their faces. She wrapped her worn shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped outside. The wind stung her cheeks red instantly. Fires crackled weakly across the settlement as neighbors stomped their feet, blew into cupped hands, and coaxed the flames higher. Despite the cold, the little village gathered, drawn by habit, hope, and the promise of Christmas. A tumbleweed tree, tied with bits of ribbon and cloth, stood near the center of the clearing. Lanterns punched with tin star holes cast trembling patterns on the thin snow. Families huddled close, carrying bowls of food, tiny wrapped bundles, and gifts sewn, carved, patched, or woven in long winter nights. Raven and her people arrived as she had promised. They came on horseback and on foot, wrapped in hides and blankets, their expressions calm but warm. Children from the camp clung to their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with curiosity as they took in the strange tumbleweed tree and tin lantern stars. Lily stepped forward, heart full. "We're glad you're here," she said. "And we are glad to be here," Raven replied. Lily tried to speak to welcome everyone properly, but her voice caught. The cold and the tightness in her chest stole her words. Ella tugged at her skirt. "Mama, we can say it." Lily nodded and squeezed her hand. Ella and Carrie stepped forward, small boots crunching in the frosty snow, hands clasped together. Ella lifted her chin. "Christmas is when Jesus was born," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And people brought him gifts, even if they were poor. Carrie added, "Mama says giving makes your heart warm." A hush fell. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to listen. Then the children began to hand out their gifts first. Painted river stones, wrapped in scraps of cloth. Bundles of dried grass tied with bits of ribbon. Tin jingles shaped like tiny bells. Wooden animals carved by the widow's boys. Small dolls stitched from leftover fabric. Adults bent to accept them, smiling in spite of the cold, offering murmured thanks and gentle pats on shoulders and hats. Raven stepped forward then and nodded to one of the women from her camp. The woman brought a basket lined with warm hides. Inside were winter treats from their stores: honeyed berries, small seeded cakes, sweetened nuts, strips of fruit leather tied with thread. Native children helped pass them to the settler children, giggling together as sticky fingers and delighted smiles spread through the group. "A taste of winter joy," Raven said quietly. Then came the moment Lily had been holding in her heart. She knelt in the snow before her daughters, the deer hide bundle tucked beneath her shawl. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. Inside were the moccasins. Soft deer hide, warm rabbit fur lining, beads in muted winter colors. Stitching so neat the seams all but disappeared. Ella gasped, "Mama." Carrie's eyes went wide. "They're beautiful." "Merry Christmas, my loves," she whispered. The girls slipped them on at once, wriggling their toes into the warmth. They danced in place, laughing, the beaded patterns catching the pale winter light. Around them, the adult exchange began. The Kansas couple gave their knitted hand warmers and wooden cross. The Ranch brothers handed out tin wind chimes that jingled softly even in the harsh wind. The widow's boys shyly offered more carved animals. The older couple presented their woven grass mats, the patterns intricate and surprising. Finally, it was Lily's turn. She stepped toward Raven with a small bundle in her hands, her embroidered cloth, folded so neatly it almost hurt to unfold it. The cloth was cream-colored cotton from her trousseau linens, saved from her old life. Along one corner, she had stitched a cluster of tiny prairie flowers in pale blue, soft yellow, and white. Each petal formed from careful, patient stitches. Opposite, a single feather lay embroidered in muted browns and bronzes, a quiet nod of respect rather than imitation. "For you," Lily said, voice rough with cold and feeling. "Each stitch, with thanks." Raven received it as if it were something rare and fragile. Her fingertips traced the blossoms, then the feather. "This is not just cloth," she murmured. "This is patience. This is care. This is heart." She pressed it gently against her chest. Lily's hands shook harder now. Her shawl was thin. The cold gnawed at her fingers. Her lips were turning blue at the edges. Raven noticed. A small crease formed between her brows. She turned and said something low to a man from her camp. He stepped forward with a heavy hide bundle. Raven unwrapped it slowly. A coat emerged. Not just any coat. A thick, deer-hide coat lined with soft rabbit fur, seams stitched tight enough to turn the wind, beadwork tracing subtle arcs along the cuffs in colors like snow, river, and rising sun. Without ceremony, Raven stepped closer, lifting the coat. "Lily," she said softly, You endure the cold for others. Let this shield you as you shield them. She set the coat around Lily's shoulders. Warmth hit like a wave. Lily sucked in a breath. Heat spread across her shoulders, down her arms, into her hands that had been numb for hours. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Raven, she managed. There is no need to thank me. Raven said gently. You have already given much. Ella tugged on Carrie's sleeve and whispered, Mama's warm now. And she was. As the murmur of the crowd picked up again, Jacob stepped forward from the edge of the gathering. He stood for a moment in the firelight, a small, canvas-wrapped bundle in his large, rough hands. Lily, he said, clearing his throat. Reckon this is for you. He held out the bundle. Lily, still overwhelmed by the coat's warmth and the swirl of the morning, opened it carefully. Inside lay a hand-carved wooden ladle, polished until the grain glowed in the firelight. The handle curved gently like the river, smoothed where her fingers would rest. I figured you'd do more cooking than any of us, Jacob said, rubbing the back of his neck. Thought you ought to have something made to fit your hands. Lily laughed softly, the sound catching halfway to a sob. It's beautiful, she whispered. Thank you. She reached into her basket and brought out a neatly folded square, the handkerchief she had stitched in secret. White cotton, a single blue J in the corner. For you, she said. Didn't have much cloth left, but seemed right that something in this place ought to have your name on it. Jacob's brows lifted. He ran his thumb over the stitched letter. I ain't had anything with my name on it since I was a boy, he said quietly. Well, Lily replied. Now you do. He folded it carefully, too carefully for a simple scrap of fabric, and tucked it inside his coat, right against his heart. Around them, fires crackled. Children ran in their new moccasins, holding seed cakes and fruit leather from Raven's camp. Adults compared gifts, warming hands over shared pots of stew. The wind still cut across the prairie. The cold was still brutal. But in that clearing by the river, warmth rose from more than just the fires. It rose from shared food and shared work, from stitched petals and carved wood, from a coat given without price, from a handkerchief with a single letter, from two little girls in their first real winter shoes. On that harsh Christmas morning, the small community at the river found something bright rising through the cold. Hope. Kindness. Family. A beginning. The celebration lingered into the afternoon. When the sun finally dropped behind the low hills and the fires burned down to coals, Raven and her people began to gather themselves to leave. We will carry this day with us, she told Lily. Your generosity, your courage. Lily squeezed her hand. And we will carry yours, she answered. That night, back at the Cottonwood camp, Raven spoke quietly. They shared what they could not spare, she said. We will answer that. By lantern and firelight, her people moved into action, men lifting the few heavy mud and straw bricks they had shaped as trials near their own camp, just to see how the earth would hold. Women bundling strips of dried meat, smoked fish, and roots, children tucking small sage-sweet cakes into pouches. These bricks are not for our lodges, Raven said. They are to show what the earth can do if you ask it the right way. We will carry them, so they may see." "Will it be enough?" one of the men asked. "It will be enough to begin," she answered. Morning broke clear and sharp. The cold still bit, but the sky was a pale, steady blue. Lily was stirring the embers of her cook fire, trying to stretch the last bone and handful of grain into another day's stew, when someone shouted from the rise above the river. "Riders!" She stepped out into the snow, coat drawn close, shielding her eyes. Raven led them. Behind her, horses and people moved together, some pulling a rough sled, others leading pack animals burdened with carefully wrapped loads. They rode straight into the heart of the settlement. "Raven?" Lily called, half laughing in surprise. "You were just here yesterday. What?" Raven dismounted, her cheeks pink from the cold, eyes bright. "Yesterday we saw how you celebrated," she said. "You gave from almost nothing. It is not right that such courage should stand behind broken walls and empty pots." She lifted her hand in signal. Bundles were opened, smoked venison and elk, dried fish wrapped in leaves, bundles of wild roots and dried berries, small cakes for the children, sweetened with what little honey they could spare. The sharp, rich scent of real meat drifted through the air. Neighbors stepped closer, eyes wide, hands pressed to mouths. Then one of the men heaved down a heavy block and set it in the snow with a solid thud. It was a brick, mud brown, straw glinting like golden threads inside. Another followed, and another. Not a mountain of them, just enough to stack into a low line to lay out a corner, to show what might be possible along this riverbank. Soon a small row of bricks sat between the two communities, steaming faintly where their chill met the air. Jacob stared. "What in the world is this?" he asked. Raven laid her palm on the nearest brick. "These are the beginning of walls," she said simply. "We test the earth near our camp sometimes, to see how it holds together. Our people still travel with the herds, we keep our lodges light. But here, you have chosen to stay. The ground will work for you if you learn how to shape it." Her gaze rested on Lily. "You should not sleep under boards that rattle whenever the wind breathes," she said. "Your girls should not lie awake listening for leaks. These few will show you what to do. The rest, your own hands will make when the sun is warm again." Lily's throat tightened. "Raven, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Jacob murmured. "Lily, you deserve a real roof." Lily looked from the bricks to the baskets of meat, to the faces of the people who had walked or ridden in the cold just to set these things at her feet. Tears stung her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Then we'll learn, and we'll build." Raven's smile deepened. "Good," she said. "When the ground softens, we will come and show you how to mix the mud and cut the straw. After that, this river will teach you the rest." Neighbors clapped one another on the shoulders, laughter and relief spilling out in shaky breaths. A few wept openly. In that moment, standing between the bricks and the food and the people who had brought them, Lily felt the shape of something steady and strong settle in her chest. They were not alone. And this bend in the river was no longer just a place they were trying to survive. It was becoming home. It was becoming home. The days that followed felt different. The wind still sliced across the plains and pushed smoke low over the camps. But now people looked toward the riverbank and saw more than broken boards and patched canvas. They saw what might someday be real walls, real rooms, a place meant to last. Lily found herself touching the nearest trial brick each time she passed it, her thumb memorizing the rough, straw-flecked surface. Jacob did the same, though he pretended not to. "When the ground thaws," he said one evening, squinting toward the river, "we'll make our own. Row after row. You watch." "I am watching," Lily answered, and she smiled. Winter clung hard to the land. Nights were long, firewood went fast, and the wind had a way of finding every gap in every wall. Still, there was laughter now. Children skated on frozen puddles, boots slick and arms pinwheeling. Someone started a habit of singing softly in the evenings, a hymn here, a camp tune there, and the sound carried from fire to fire. Then, one sharp night, when the stars shone too bright and the cold cut too clean, Lily saw a strange glow on the horizon. Not starlight, not lanterns. Fire. At first, she thought it was the sunset trapped somehow at the edge of the world, but the sky was already black. The glow flickered, grew, leapt. "Jacob!" she called, stepping out from her lean-to, coat clutched tight. "Do you see that?" He turned, followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. "That's toward the cottonwoods," he said. "Raven's camp." The alarm spread quick and low through the settlement. No one shouted. The cold and the memory of their own losses kept the voices hushed. But men began moving. Jacob, the ranch brothers, the older Kansas man whose hands still knew how to work a team in the dark. "We'll take the wagons," Jacob said. "Barrels, blankets, whatever we've got. If the fire's running through the grass, we might turn it." "I'm coming," Lily said. Jacob shook his head. "You're not." She stared back at him, steady. "If there are burns or smoke, they'll need someone to tend them. I've learned a little, and those are our neighbors." He hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded once. "Fine. You right up front." They jolted out of the settlement in a ragged line. 2 wagons, a handful of riders, shovels and wet sacks and barrels sloshing with water. The icy wind knifed their faces as they pounded toward the glow. As they crested the last low rise, Lily's heart lurched. The cottonwood hollow was washed in a shifting orange light. One hide lodge had already burned to its frame, charred poles jutting like blackened ribs against the sky. Another smoldered, smoke pouring from a torn side as men beat at the flames with wet blankets. Sparks leapt into dry winter grass, racing outward in quick, hungry tongues. Raven's people were everywhere, shouting, hauling water from the half-frozen river, dragging blankets and bundles clear of the worst of it. "Get the line going!" Jacob shouted, already jumping from the wagon. "From the river to the edge, keep that grass wet!" There was no time to think. They plunged in together. Settlers and Raven's people hauled water side by side, passing buckets until their arms shook. Others slapped down burning patches with wet sacks, feet slipping in mud and ice. Children dashed to and fro with smaller pails, faces streaked with soot and tears. Smoke clawed at Lily's throat, but she pushed on, helping drag bedrolls and bundles of hides away from sparks, guiding the oldest and the youngest toward the shelter of the riverbank. Once, through the haze, she saw Raven's face, cheeks blackened, hair loose from its braids, eyes sharp and steady. "You came," Raven said, breathless but sure. "Of course we did," Lily answered, coughing. "You came to us." The fire did what fire sometimes does when brave hands and cold ground push back. It slowed, sullen, then finally lay down. By midnight, only embers glowed where a lodge had stood. 2 others were scarred but standing. No one had been lost, though several had burns and smoke-burned eyes, and a few families had nothing left but the clothes on their backs and what they'd dragged clear in those frantic first minutes. "Bring them with us," Lily said at once, voice rough from smoke. "The elders, The little ones. Anyone without a shelter. We can make room until things are rebuilt." Raven hesitated, pride flickering in her eyes. "You've shared what you do not have," Lily said more gently. "Let us do the same." Raven's shoulders softened. She nodded once. "Some will come," she said, "until we're ready to stand here again." So they did. The wagons rolled back through the dark with more people than they'd carried out. Grandmothers wrapped in smoke-scented blankets, children blinking at the unfamiliar shapes of the settler shacks, a man with his arm bandaged in hurried strips of cloth. Riverbend made space. Families doubled up in the lean-tos and small sheds. Lily and the girls gave up half their sleeping pallet for a grandmother and a quiet little boy who clung to a charred toy made of sticks and twine. Jacob and the Ranch brothers took turns sleeping near the cook fires instead of under roofs. For several weeks, the settlement and the Cottonwood people breathed together, eating from the same pots, sharing stories in low voices at night, shivering through the same cold wind. When enough new lodges had been raised beneath the cottonwoods for everyone to return, the older woman Lily had nursed through a fierce cough, pressed both her hands between Lily's, and murmured something in her own language. Raven, standing nearby, translated quietly. "She says, when my grandchildren ask where the smoke took us that winter, I will tell them we went to the place where strangers opened their doors before we knocked." Lily swallowed hard. Tell her we were glad to have them." "She already knows," Raven replied. When the thaw finally came, it came all at once. Ice broke loose on the river and spun away in jagged chunks. The ground turned to a heavy, boot-sucking mud, then, almost overnight, to soft earth that drank the sun like a man who'd been too long without water. "It's time," Jacob said one morning, standing over the trial bricks. "If we're going to learn this, now's the season." Raven kept her promise. She and several men from her camp rode down to the bend, not with heavy loads this time, but with tools and knowing hands. They did not build the settlers' houses for them. Instead, they stood at the river's edge and showed them how. Lily, Jacob, the Kansas couple, the widow, the brothers, every able hand waded into the shallow edge of the river, trousers rolled, skirts hitched, feet sinking into cold mud. Raven scooped a double handful of wet earth and dropped it into a low wooden trough. "You cut the straw short," she said, demonstrating. "Like this, so it runs through the mud instead of lying on top." They chopped straw until their fingers ached. Children fetched armfuls, laughing when it stuck in their hair. "Then you mix," Raven said. They mixed. Feet and hands churned mud and straw until it changed from sloppy river muck to something thicker, stickier, almost springy. They poured it into simple block molds and scraped the top smooth with old boards. "The sun does the rest," one of Raven's men said. "Turn them when they're ready. Let the wind go all the way around." Brick by brick, row by row, a long line of drying blocks grew along the highest part of the riverbank where floodwater wouldn't reach. "It's like growing a house from the ground," Carrie whispered one afternoon, tracing a line of straw with one small finger. "In a way, it is," Lily said. Through spring and into early summer, the settlers worked. When they weren't planting or mending or hunting, they mixed mud, lifted bricks, and laid them to dry. The Cottonwood people came and went, sometimes helping for an afternoon before turning back toward their own camp. By the time the grass along the prairie shimmered gold and green under the long days, they had enough bricks for one good building. Not fine, not fancy, but solid. "We start with a long house," Jacob said at a meeting by the fire. something that can hold more than one family when the storms come. After that, we'll build smaller cabins as we're able." No one argued. All that summer, the sound of building wrapped around Riverbend. Bricks thudded into place, thick with mud mortar. Rough-hewn timbers from along the river became roof beams. Children carried small loads of straw. Women formed and passed bricks. Men lifted and set them, shirts pasted to their backs with sweat. Lily worked alongside them, hands scraped and strong. With each course of bricks, her chest loosened a little more. The longhouse rose bit by bit, thick-walled, low-roofed, with a stout stone chimney at one end and shuttered openings high on the walls to let out smoke and heat. Inside, they divided the floor into simple corners: a space for the widow and her boys, a space for the Kansas couple, a corner for the older man with the cough, and room left for anyone who might stumble in off the river in some hard future winter. Near the center, they left a wide stretch of floor open for a table and a shared hearth. The day they set the last roof board and plastered the last gap with mud, the entire settlement gathered in front of the door. The building was not straight as a soldier or smooth as a town church, but it stood, heavy and sure, in a way no canvas or leaning board wall ever could. Jacob turned to Lily, hat in his hands, face gentler than she'd ever seen it. "You should be the one to walk in first," he said. "You've been holding everybody else up for near a year now." Lily shook her head. "This isn't my house. It belongs to all of us." "Maybe so," he replied, "but you're the heart of it." She opened her mouth to argue and found she couldn't. Instead, she laughed under her breath and stepped up to the doorway, Ella and Carrie clinging to her sides. They crossed the threshold together. The air inside was cooler, quiet in a way the wind-plucked shacks never were. Light slanted in through the high windows. The new hearth waited, clean and ready. Lily stood in the middle and turned slowly, taking it in. It was simple, raw. Clay still drying, roof beams still smelling of sap. But it was strong. Behind her, she heard Jacob clear his throat. "Lily?" She turned. He stood just inside the doorway now, twisting his hat brim between his big hands. Most of the settlement lingered outside, laughing and talking, leaving the four of them a small pocket of privacy. "These months," he said slowly. "I've watched you mend clothes, share food, patch roofs, sit up with sick folks when you were bone-tired yourself." "There wasn't anyone else to do it," she answered softly. "That's just it," he replied. "You didn't wait for anyone else." He took a breath, the way a man does when he's made up his mind and can't turn back. "I know I'm not Sam," he said. "I'd never try to be. But I care about you and those girls. I care about this place. When I think about the future, about whose roof I'm fixing, whose fire I'm cutting wood for, I keep seeing you." Lily's heart thudded once, hard. Jacob's voice dropped. "If you'd have me," he said, "I'd be honored to marry you. We could build a smaller place off this long house, something just yours and the girls. Maybe—" He glanced toward the open doorway, where the light outside was already taking on the long slant of late summer. "Maybe we could stand up together at Christmas. Seems like a good day for a new beginning." Lily didn't speak at once. She looked around the room, the fresh-laid hearth, the sturdy walls, the empty corners that would soon hold beds and blankets and laughter. She thought of Sam, of the dust storm, of the grave on the hill. She thought of Jacob chopping wood in the freezing dark, of him hauling water during the fire at the cottonwoods, of his rough hands cradling a handkerchief with a single stitched letter. She stepped closer, coat whispering against the new brick. "Yes," she said. Her voice shook, but the word was clear. "Yes, Jacob. I'll marry you. And the Christmas wedding would be beautiful." His shoulders sagged with relief. He smiled, quick and almost boyish, and brushed a thumb across his eyes before jamming his hat back on his head. "Well then," he said, a little gruff now. "Guess we've got some planning to do." The news spread quickly and warmly. By autumn, the Longhouse was the beating heart of Riverbend. Meals, meetings, small celebrations, and weary arrivals all passed through its door. Families still tended their own little shelters nearby, but when storms threatened or sickness passed through, people drifted to the safety of those thick walls and the great central hearth. Raven's people came and went with the seasons. As the grass grew tall and the buffalo trails deepened across the plains, her camp began to move more, following old paths. Yet she still appeared at Riverbend now and then. A morning ride to trade smoked meat for flour, an evening visit to leave herbs on Lily's table with quiet instructions about when and how to use them. "This one eases pain," Raven would say. "This one settles the heart when it runs too fast. This one, in small sips, brings sleep." Lily listened carefully, storing each lesson in her mind alongside her Bible verses and her mother's old recipes. By the time the cottonwoods unfurled their first pale leaves and the river ran full and restless with meltwater, Raven's visits grew fewer. "Our people must follow the herds," she explained one soft morning, tying bundles behind her saddle. "The land calls us north and west for a while. But when winter comes, and if the snows and the game are kind, I'll find my way back." Lily gripped her hand. "I'll be praying you do. We'll be planning a wedding by then." Raven's eyes warmed. "Then I will do my best to be standing at your door before the vows are spoken." Spring settled, then spilled smoothly into summer. Riverbend changed again. Gardens appeared along the curve of the river, neat rows of beans, corn, squash, potatoes, and late-planted greens. Children chased grasshoppers between the rows and came home with streaks of dirt on their cheeks and fistfuls of wildflowers. Men set lines and nets in the river, bringing in fish that shimmered like dull silver coins in the morning light. The widow's boys proved to be the best at it, quick and patient, their pockets always bulging with extra hooks and bits of line. The older Kansas man taught anyone who asked how to dry meat in thin strips and hang it away from dogs and raccoons. The older woman experimented with herbs along the riverbank, asking Lily's opinion and trading ideas. Lily's table filled slowly with jars. Dried beans, pickled vegetables, fruit preserved in syrup or dried on strings, bundles of sage and yarrow hanging from the rafters to dry. When she looked at her stores, the ache of last winter's thin stew eased a little. Summer pressed on, hot and flat and humming with insects. Then trouble rode in. They came on a day when the air felt heavier than usual, stormless but tense. 4 men on lathered horses, dust in their clothes, rifles slung across their backs. Their eyes took in the longhouse, the gardens, the wagons, the neatly stacked wood along the river. "Looks like somebody's been busy," the lead rider said, sliding from his saddle with a swagger that didn't quite match the wear on his boots. Jacob stepped out from the longhouse, shoulders squared, jaw firm. Several other men drifted closer, hands never far from their own tools and weapons. "We're a small settlement," Jacob said. "What can we do for you?" The stranger grinned without warmth.
"Name's Cole," he said. "Me and my boys here have been riding a long way. Land out there's rough. Hard to make anything stick. But this?" He swept an arm to take in the river, the houses, the fields. "Looks like you folks did the hard work for us." A prickling unease ran along Lily's spine. She moved quietly to the door, Carrie and Ella just behind her, and stood half-hidden in the shadow of the frame. "This is our home," Jacob replied. "We bled for it. We buried our own here. You're welcome to water your horses, rest, share a meal if we've got enough. Then move on." Cole laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "I think you misunderstand," he said. "See where we come from. The man with the gun and the horse decides whose land is whose." He tapped the butt of his rifle. His companions shifted in their saddles, watching the gathered settlers with narrowed eyes. Jacob didn't flinch. "We aren't looking for trouble," he said. Cole's grin sharpened. "Trouble's already here." Voices rose around them, some angry, some afraid. Children were hurried back behind doors. The widow's youngest boy clung to Lily's skirt, wide-eyed. Lily's heart thudded in her chest. She thought of Raven's lessons, of plants that soothed, and plants that, taken in too strong doses, could turn a man's limbs heavy and his thoughts slow. Fear washed through her. So did a clear, cold resolve. She stepped forward just enough to be seen. "Mr. Cole," she called, keeping her tone level, almost courteous. "If you and your men have been riding hard, you must be hungry. Our noon meal is nearly ready. There's stew for anyone who wants it. You're welcome to join us at the longhouse table before we talk further." Jacob's head snapped slightly toward her, surprise flashing in his eyes. She met his gaze steadily. Cole considered. He looked around at the rifles, few in number, but held in hands that had defended this ground before. He looked at the women, the children peeking from doorways, the longhouse built solid from brick and will. "Stew, huh?" he said at last. "Can't say no to a free meal." He signaled to his men. "Dismount. We'll fill our bellies before we decide how this conversation ends." As they led their horses toward water, Lily slipped back inside. "What are you doing?" Jacob hissed under his breath, following her. "You don't feed wolves at your own table." "Better here where we can see them," she answered quietly, already moving toward the shelf where her herbs were stored. "And where we can decide how the evening ends." She took down a small bundle, leaves and roots Raven had pressed into her hands one cool morning and labeled with careful words. "This one brings sleep if taken too much. Use only when rest is needed, and never alone," Raven had warned. Lily had never used it. Not until now. She chopped it fine, mixing it into a pot of steeping tea, and then ladling some of that tea into the great stew kettle, already rich with beans and dried meat. Her hands shook, but her mind was steady. "Just enough," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Not to harm. Just to put the wolves in a pen where they can't bite." When the men came in, laughing and jostling, the longhouse felt suddenly too small. Their presence filled the room like smoke, loud, careless,
certain. Lily and the other women served them first. Cole watched her with a speculative eye as she set a brimming bowl in front of him.
You run this place? He asked.
No, she said calmly. It runs itself. I just keep the pots from burning. He barked a laugh and dug in. The stew went fast. The riders ate like men who had long since forgotten what it felt like to be truly full. They had second helpings, then sopped the last drops with hard crusts of bread. Lily waited. It didn't take long. The first man's words began to slur. He blinked, shook his head and tried to stand, only to sway and drop back onto the bench. Another laughed at him, then found his own legs oddly uncooperative. Cole's grin faltered as his eyelids grew heavier, his tongue thick.
What did you...
he started, but the last word broke into a yawn he couldn't stifle. Jacob was ready. So were the others. While the riders' limbs turned heavy and their heads lolled, the settlers moved in. Rifles were eased away. Knives slipped from belts. Hands that had built houses and buried their dead now bound the men's wrists and ankles with practiced, unshaking competence. By the time the draft had done its work, the 4 gunmen lay in one corner of the longhouse, breathing deeply, faces slack with something that looked almost like peaceful sleep.
Will they wake?
The widow asked uneasily.
Oh, they'll wake,
Willie said, wiping her shaking hands on her apron. But by then, they can be someone else's problem. At dawn, still groggy, the men found themselves lashed tight in the back of a wagon, jolting over frozen ruts toward the nearest town. The sheriff listened to Jacob's story with a keen eye, then brought out a stack of yellowed posters. Cole's face stared back from 2 of them. Another of the men had his own crude likeness sketched above a list of charges.
You did us all a favor bringing these fellas in,
the sheriff said, counting out reward money with deliberate care.
Lot of folks will sleep easier tonight.
When Jacob rolled back into Riverbend 2 days later, the wagon carried more than just his tired frame. There were sacks of flour, sugar, and cornmeal, a small keg of molasses, bright bolts of cloth, blue, cream, and a deep rose that made Carrie clap her hands when she saw it. There was coffee, a crate of nails, a new saw, a stack of second-hand books, and wrapped in brown paper, a length of fine white fabric Willie didn't dare touch at first. "What's that?" she whispered, fingers hovering over it. Jacob's eyes crinkled at the corners.
Town seamstress said every bride deserves a bit of new cloth, he said. I told her you'd turn it into something better than anything hanging in her window.
Lily lifted the fabric as if it might melt in her hands. It wasn't fancy silk or lace, just smooth, tightly woven cotton with a soft sheen. But to her, it felt like pure luxury. "It's too much," she murmured.
Not half of what you've earned, he replied. The sheriff said that reward money belonged to Riverbend. We all agreed some of it ought to go toward the wedding. The rest bought what we needed for winter.
She blinked away sudden tears. "I'll make it last," she promised. "Every scrap." Autumn slid into early winter, gentler this time. The longhouse held the warmth from its hearth better than any shack had. The gardens had yielded enough to fill shelves and barrels. The river had given up fish that now lay smoked and dried in neat rows. The cottonwood camp, though farther this year, sent a small party to trade meat and hides before the worst of the snow. Raven was not among them. "She travels another trail for now," one of the men told Lily. "But she remembers." Lily smiled and tried not to let her disappointment show. "Tell her we're thinking of her," she said. "Tell her Christmas is coming." She sewed as the days shortened. By lamplight and firelight, she shaped the white cloth into a simple dress with clean lines, high-necked for the cold, sleeves fitted snug to her arms, the skirt wide enough to move comfortably in, but not so full that it wasted fabric. Along the hem and cuffs, she added tiny hand-stitched details, little sprays of prairie flowers like the ones she'd sewn on Raven's cloth. A single feather tucked at the inside of each wrist, where only she would know it was there. Ella and Carrie each received a new ribbon from the rose-colored fabric and small sashes to brighten their best dresses. The men mended their coats, polished their boots, and patched any clothing that would show at the wedding. Someone found evergreen branches along the river and brought them home, the sharp scent of pine filling the longhouse as they were hung in the rafters with bits of ribbon and sage. On Christmas morning, snow whispered down from a sky the color of pewter. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, quiet fall that softened every sound. Lily dressed carefully, hands only a little unsteady as she buttoned the last small buttons at her throat. Her hair, braided neatly by the older Kansas woman, lay coiled at the back of her head. The white dress skimmed her frame like it had been waiting for her since the first day she stepped onto the prairie. "Do I look all right?" she asked the girls. "You look like the candles in church," Ella said solemnly. "You look like a storybook," Carrie breathed. Jacob waited outside the longhouse, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair tamed more than usual, a clean shirt sitting stiffly beneath his worn coat. He turned when he heard the door open and went very still. "You'll catch cold with your mouth hanging open like that," Lily teased, though her own breath had gone light. He shut it with a soft huff of laughter. You look beautiful," he said simply. "Like you belong right here, in this place, on this day." Neighbors gathered in the longhouse, boots stamping snow from their soles, voices hushed with a shared sense of something sacred. Evergreen and sage hung along the walls. Candles flickered on the rough table, their light reflected in windows laced with frost. The widow had baked her best biscuits. The Kansas couple had made a pot of special coffee. Children wriggled in borrowed finery, eyes wide. A circuit preacher who happened to be passing through had agreed to stop for the ceremony. He stood at the front of the room now, Bible in hand, smile creasing the weathered lines of his face. "We're waiting on one more," Lily said quietly, glancing toward the door, though she hardly let herself hope. Snow fell, soft and steady. Time stretched. The room murmured and shifted. Then, from outside, came the faint, unmistakable sound of horses. Hooves on packed snow. A creak of leather. A low murmur in a familiar voice. Ella's head snapped up. "Mama," she whispered, eyes shining. "I think it's them." The door opened, letting in a slice of cold air and swirling flakes. Raven stepped through. She wore a winter cloak of dark wool lined with fur, snow melting in beads along the shoulders. Her blonde braids were tucked beneath a warm hood, but her face was open and glowing. Beside her stood a tall native man with calm eyes and a steady posture.
his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, as though he'd been doing it his whole life. Beneath Raven's cloak, the fabric bulged gently over a rounded belly. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "You came," she managed. "I told you I would find my way back if I could," Raven said, her voice warm with satisfaction. The trails were kind. The baby didn't complain too much, and my husband was curious about this place I kept speaking of in my sleep. The man inclined his head, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "We brought a small gift," Raven added. She reached into a pouch at her side and drew out a necklace. It was simple and beautiful, a strand of beads made from tiny polished bone and river stones, interspersed with a few pieces of traded glass that caught the candlelight like bits of captured sunrise. At the center hung a single, small, carved feather, smoothed until it felt like silk under the fingers. "For you to wear," Raven said, stepping close. "Today, and whenever you need to remember that the land itself stands with you." Her fingers were gentle as she fastened the necklace at the back of Lily's neck. The beads settled against the white of the dress, warm and cool all at once. Lily's eyes burned. She rested one hand lightly on Raven's rounded belly. "And for you," she whispered. "May your child always know he or she is welcome at Riverbend." "They already do," Raven replied softly. "I've told them the story of the woman who traded cloth and a brave heart for moccasins and a coat." The preacher cleared his throat politely, eyes crinkling with quiet amusement. "If our bride and groom are ready," he said, "I believe we have ourselves a wedding." Lily and Jacob stood before him, hands joined, the murmur of the gathered voices fading into a warm hum. The words spoken were simple and familiar, promises of faithfulness in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, in seasons of plenty and in seasons when the wind rattled the walls and food ran low. "I do," Jacob said, voice thick. "I do," Lily answered, steady and sure. He kissed her, brief and reverent, and the room erupted. Cheers, laughter, a few honest tears wiped quickly away. Children hopped in place. The widow dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her apron. The Kansas couple clasped hands. Raven watched from the side, one hand resting on her belly, the other lightly gripping her husband's fingers. Afterward, they ate. Biscuits, stewed meat, dried apples warmed with sugar and spice, coffee poured into mismatched cups, sweet cakes brought by Raven's people and saved for this day. Someone coaxed an old fiddle to life. Feet tapped. A few brave couples took to the center of the room for slow, shuffling turns that were more laughter than grace. Lily's necklace caught the candlelight as she moved from table to table, laughing, thanking, making sure every plate was full. Jacob stayed close, his hand always finding hers when she passed.
Outside, snow continued to drift down, softening the sharp lines of the prairie, tucking the long house and the smaller shelters into a quiet, white embrace. Later, when most of the guests had gone back to their own beds and the last candle was sputtering low, Lily and Jacob stepped out into the cold. The river whispered under its thin skin of ice. Smoke from the chimney rose straight into a sky thick with stars. "This place," Jacob said quietly, tucking her hand more firmly into the crook of his arm. "When we first came, I wasn't sure it'd ever be more than a hard stop on the way to somewhere else." "Me neither," Lily admitted. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." She looked back at the longhouse, the bricks gleaming faintly under their thin sweater of frost, the windows glowing with the last of the firelight, the faint sound of Ella and Carrie giggling over their shared quilt drifting out through the chimney. At Raven's dark shape moving inside, her hand resting on her belly as she spoke with the older Kansas woman. At the place where Sam's grave lay on the rise above the river, now watched over by a simple wooden cross the Kansas man had carved with careful hands. Gifts, she thought. A doe laid in the grass when her heart was breaking. Moccasins stitched for little feet that had walked too far. A coat placed over her shoulders when the cold threatened to bite clear through. Bricks to show them how to ask the earth for shelter. Herbs that turned danger into an opportunity for justice. Reward money turned into flour, cloth, books, and the fabric of a wedding dress. A necklace that rested against her heart, its small carved feather a reminder of friendship and shared courage. And now, this. A husband beside her, 2 daughters warm and safe inside. A community that had grown from nothing but need and stubborn hope. Riverbend had begun as a broken promise at the end of a hard road. Now, under the winter stars, it stood as something else entirely. A place where gifts moved in circles, where sorrow and kindness lived side by side, and where a woman who once wondered if she could survive the next storm now looked forward to planting next spring's garden. Lily leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go home." Together, they walked back through the snow toward the longhouse, the necklace warm against her throat, the light from inside spilling out across the white ground like a path. If you enjoyed this story, please press like and subscribe for more Frontier Tales.